Good morning. If you saw my last video, you know that I talked about using a smartphone as a good first step in your photography. That leads us to thinking about upgrading. I'm going to be speaking to you as if you are someone who's on a budget. Specifically, I'm going to look at the options that are $1,500 or less. So to help you navigate around the camera market, we're going to talk about cameras that fall into two different categories. Each category has two options, meaning we're going to be talking about four different types of cameras. Now, the first category is DSLR and mirrorless. Those are the two options within this category. This is simply referring to the type of technology being used to get an image created from the sensor and conveying it onto a viewfinder or an LCD. At the outset, the obvious difference when you look at a mirrorless camera versus a DSLR is the size difference, the mirrorless being the smaller body of the two. That could be an advantage, especially if you are outdoors carrying a camera around all the time. As far as image quality goes, right now you're not going to see any real difference between the two within a budget. So it could be argued, however, that images from the mirrorless camera tend to be sharper than the DSLR. But other than that, image quality, really no difference at this point. Having said that, it seems that the brands are putting more into their mirrorless technology than their DSLR. And in fact, Sony no longer makes DSLR cameras. So it seems the wave of the future is mirrorless cameras. The technology is getting better all the time. The autofocus, the resolution, all of this stuff is improving every year. So as far as one over the other, right now, no difference, really great difference anyway in quality, but think about the future and where things are going with the mirrorless. Now the other category is the sensor size category, which is to say full frame versus APS-C. The other term used for APS-C cameras is cropped sensor. Now, every digital camera, including your smartphone, has a sensor inside of it. The smartphone sensor is very, very small compared to what is in these cameras. However, the difference between a full-frame camera and a crop sensor camera is that the full frame has the largest sensor at 35 millimeter width. The cropped sensor camera is smaller at about 23 to 24 millimeters. What that means is that you have a generally lower quality sensor than your full frame. Full frame cameras used to be and somewhat still are referred to as professional cameras, professional level cameras. They're more expensive, but they're higher quality. The differences between a crop sensor camera and a full frame camera are getting less and less as the technology improves. However, overall, full frame offers more advantages than your APS-C camera. Okay, so with that, our four options are, we can go with mirrorless or DSLR. If we go with mirrorless, we have the choice of a crop sensor or full frame. If we go with the DSLR, we have the option of crop sensor or full frame. All right, so with that, let's talk about budget and how all of this fits into our $1,500 budget. So take a look at this, and this is quite interesting. If you look at the mirrorless, it's very interesting to me that you can go from a crop sensor camera to a full frame camera and not have to spend quite as much as you would if you do that with a DSLR. So if you start with DSLR crop sensor camera and you in the future want to go with a full frame, you can see the difference in price there is considerably higher than if you start off with the mirrorless. Now notice those prices include a kit lens. because you're going to need a lens to go with this camera. So what companies do is they offer you a good deal when you buy your first camera. They say, okay, you buy this camera and we'll add a lens on to it at a much lower price than if you were to buy the lens separately. So they're giving you a really good deal on a lens to start with. Kit lenses tend to be lower quality. They're not bad lenses, they can be quite good. And they can carry you for a year or two into your photography if you continue to grow. Keep that in mind, because more than likely they will not be your last lens. All right, so we have our 4 types of cameras that we want to look at. At this point, I highly recommend that you go online to one of the camera companies, not Amazon, but one of the camera companies that sells every camera and lens on the planet, and do your research and do your price comparison, more importantly. The 2 companies that are very popular are Adorama.com and B&HVideo.com. I'm not recommending one or the other. I have purchased from both, but you will at least find a camera in there, even if you decide not to purchase from that company. You can do your research there. So when you come in there, you can narrow your search down. You might start by looking at just the mirrorless. And then you can continue to narrow your search. You might choose to just narrow it down to the 3 top brands, which are Canon, Nikon, and Sony. I recommend you do that because really your choices are going to come down to those 3 brands 99% of the time. So there's that. You can also narrow it down to look at just the full frame or the APS-C camera. And then also I recommend that you choose body only. That will kind of remove a lot of the noise, because the companies will try to add a lot of accessories and other things beyond lenses. So we just want to look at the camera body. But you're going to see here in a minute that you can also look at the kit lenses by choosing a specific camera to look at. So body only. One last thing that I recommend, and that is to look at cameras that have built-in viewfinders. So you filter that out. What do I mean by that? This is a camera with a viewfinder. Your smartphone does not have a viewfinder. So a viewfinder is that eyepiece that photographers look through when they're holding the camera up to their face. You're going to want that. I mean, that is a feature that is very important, especially if you're going to be shooting moving subjects. So you want a camera with a viewfinder. Once you have your search done, you can also sort by low to high, by the way. Once you have your search done, then kind of scroll through and take a look at what's available price-wise. Pick a camera, just pick on one. Now you can look at the product options, and this is where you're going to see the kit lenses and what is available for that specific camera. So take a look at what options are given to you. There's sometimes more than one option. Some kits have more than one lens, which is very nice. So the pricing is quite nice, quite affordable for a first camera and lens. And then scroll down and take a look at the reviews, the overview. You can look at the specs, most of which might look Greek to you. But as you continue to grow as a photographer, most of these are going to become more important to you depending on the type of photography you're doing. Now, the camera is not the only thing you're buying. You're also buying a lens. So let's talk about the lens for a second, because that is going to affect your budget on down the line, whatever decision you make at the beginning. If you start with an APS-C camera, like a lot of people do because it fits within their budget, you're likely going to get a kit lens to go with it. If you are okay with the idea that the kit lens is not your last lens, then no problem. You got a nice setup to start with. You're ready to go. You're ready to get out there and shoot. Understand, however, that that kit lens is not going to work on a higher quality full frame camera that you are likely going to purchase on down the line if you are serious about your photography and you grow as a photographer. That kit lens is dedicated to your APS-C sensor format. Your APS-C dedicated lenses are not necessarily low quality lenses. You can put a lot of money into those guys. But understand that none of those lenses is going to fit on that full frame camera. It'll fit. You're just not going to get that full frame look that you're spending money on. Make sure that you purchase a lens that is compatible with a full frame camera. You can easily figure that out by going back to that camera company and looking at the lenses. If you look at the lenses and how you can filter your search out, if you scroll down, you're going to see that there is a lens format option. Go to that and you will see that full frame is an option. If you choose full frame, every single one of those lenses that you see there are going to work on your APS-C camera. Now, the other thing you have to think about is the difference between, let me get my two cameras up here, the difference between the DSLR and the mirrorless cameras when it comes to lenses. The mount on a mirrorless camera is different than the mount that's on a DSLR camera. When I say mount, I'm talking about the communication between the camera and the lens. This area where the lens attaches is called the mount. So this is a different mount than the DSLR. So what that means is that the lens that's on this DSLR is not going to mount on this mirrorless and vice versa. So if typically what people do is they start with a DSLR because they've been around for a long time, is they upgrade to a mirrorless. And what they find is that those DSLR lenses don't work with this mirrorless. Fortunately, there are adapters, and that's what this is. So this adapter right here is what allows me to attach this lens to that mirrorless camera. If I didn't have that adapter, I couldn't do that. So what does that mean for you for your first camera? If you go with a DSLR, it is likely that your next camera is going to be mirrorless. And the reason why I say that is what I said earlier, it's the wave of the future. The technology is advancing so much that it's very doubtful mirrorless is not going to be in your future. So think about that and think, okay, well, if I do start with a DSLR, I know I'm going to have some lenses to go with it. How am I going to be able to transfer that to my mirrorless? Now, you already know you're going to have to get an adapter. That works really well if you stay within brand, Sony to Sony, or Nikon to Nikon, and so on. But if you have third-party lenses like Sigma or Tokina or Tamron, like I have had, it's not going to work as well with this adapter. You may not get full function of that lens even with the adapter. That's problematic going from DSLR to mirrorless. So that's probably another plug for starting off with mirrorless. Let me just summarize real quick. We are talking about a budget of $1,500 or less. What I have found in my research is that you're going to find more choices among mirrorless, affordable choices. You can even find affordable full-frame cameras in the mirrorless line. So I think that that's a game changer. Okay, the other important point is whatever kit lens you start with, it's not going to be your last lens. You will be upgrading lenses. So remember, keep in mind, mirrorless versus DSLR, APS versus full frame. Very important considerations when you are purchasing lenses. Final word is there are going to be additional costs right off the bat. Consider memory cards, consider batteries. If you're going out in the field, if you're doing a lot of traveling, where are you going to put all those images? You may need a portable storage unit. Think about backpacks and bags, carrying your equipment. Think about tripod and mounting for getting your camera on the tripod. If you're into landscapes, waterscapes, think about filters, circular polarizing filters, for instance. And then lastly, think about editing. Think about storing. You're buying a higher quality camera, so you're going to want to take your editing to another level. So think about that as well. Think about storing all of your images. Where are those going to go? So all of this is going to cost money. So think about it. Not everything has to be purchased right away, but these are things that, as you grow as a photographer, are going to become more and more important. Well, thank you for looking on, and I hope you get that new camera.